Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
We've said it before, but we think it's worth saying again. Your church communications, as with anything else you do in your church, should be covered in prayer.
Yeah, we strongly believe that church comms is a ministry. You're seeking to use gifts that God has given you and church resources to share the gospel with those around you. That's sharing love to your community, showing what's going on, not just inviting people to events, but highlighting the loving family relationships that do make up your church. This isn't something that the world is used to seeing. And for any other church ministry, we wouldn't think about stepping out of the door without prayer. You know, we pray before our Sunday services. If we're going out to do some leafleting in the town or door-to-door evangelism, it's pretty likely that we're going to sit down for at least 5 or 10 minutes and have a quick prayer meeting to pray over what's about to happen. And we do this hopefully not just because of the habit, though to be honest, there are worse traditions in church than prayer meetings, but we do it because we recognise we're seeking to do God's work and that we need his help to do it. So why should communications be any different?
Joe, I think often it feels different because it's quite a sort of solitary process, you know, especially if you're in a small church where it's just one person's responsibility alongside kind of a number of other things they're doing. You know, the nature of just sitting on your own in front of a computer screen, you know, rather than it being sort of a group discussion or you're doing it with lots of people, it's quite a kind of private and lonely, to be honest. I mean, I feel that very often through my work because it's just me doing it. You know, it often feels like it's more of a technical or logistical task, you know, or it's, you know, sometimes a creative one. And that's very exciting when that happens. But it doesn't often feel like a spiritual one.
No.
Or perhaps it's just not a priority because of all of our other responsibilities that we all end up taking on in life and within the church. So it becomes more of a kind of a case of, we just get it done rather than being intentional with it. And, you know, we get it. We've both talked about it very often. And, you know, it's easy for it to just become the norm, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's right. I think even if comms is often more of a solo task, we should absolutely be praying for God's help with it. Because the messages that we're writing on our keyboard have real potential. You know, they have the potential to reach lots of people, maybe more even than the words that are spoken from the front on a Sunday morning. And that could be quite a scary thought. Obviously, we'll do our best to craft what we write in a really careful, thoughtful way. But isn't that true even more of the vicar or the pastor for his sermon? You can bet that they're putting all of their care and attention into the words that they're going to say to you, taking it really seriously, and yet they are still praying really hard about what they're going to say, the words they're going to bring to the church, no matter how hard they've worked on them. So we need to remember that with comms, it's an act of worship to God. It's a calling, and I think it's a really high calling, not just a tick box exercise. So before you post that content, before you sit down to organize the content or the events that you're going to be putting out over the next couple of months, be sure to make the time to pray specifically for the work you're about to do, that God will use it for his glory, and make that a discipline.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I find it sometimes, and probably sometimes more often than I'd actually like, you know, I need to keep a perspective, and prayer is a really important way of doing this. As silly as it might sound, you know, as someone whose life, my ministry, my hobbies, my means of connection and relationships with people revolves around social media and online, I do need to remind myself that it is not life and death. And I'm very aware of it not sounding flippant. It, you know, like it doesn't matter what I do or how I do it. It does matter, and it matters to me a lot. But sometimes it can matter a bit too much, and it can take up too much of my thinking and my attention and concern and my responsibility because I did that wrong, rather than it being a sort of a working alongside God in the way that I should be doing it.
And it's a matter of balance as well, isn't it? That perspective and that balance between the different things that you're doing and, the different positive and negative attitudes that come with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, generally speaking, at the end of the day, if something doesn't get sent out, if the wrong photo or poster gets attached to a post, or the wrong person or account gets tagged, I mean, I'm in a bit of doo-doo maybe, but, it's not the end of the world. I had an issue with Church Suite recently and I had an error. Emails didn't get sent out. I apologised and we all moved on, and that was fine. And it probably was one of the worst things to happen recently for work, but I was like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about it.
It's not what you aim for.
No, absolutely not. And I emailed my client and I said, I'm really sorry this happened. I've sent it out now. That was my fault for I hadn't checked through the process when I was scheduling it. Ironically, that it was scheduling that caused the problem. But my sister's a nurse and she worked in intensive care for a bit. And I mean, she wouldn't tell us everything, but I am well aware that my work is not a case of if I do something wrong, I could kill someone, which, I mean, she never said it like that, but.
Read between the lines.
Yeah. And like, I mean, that's quite scary. Like to think that is the burden that that goes alongside your job. And I'd like to think that my work is life-giving to me, to those I work with, and to those who see my content. I'm learning that the way for me to think about it is that I'm sowing seeds into their lives so that their lives will be changed. But sometimes it's good to remind myself that my job is not always as serious or as dramatic as I sometimes make it out to seem, or I feel that it is. I'm not dramatic at all, am I?
No comment.
No. I also have to remind myself to keep good mental health practices, as you said, balance, because thinking about how often I'm online, just not looking at screens all the time, thinking about what I'm consuming, who I'm engaging with, and actually how I'm using it, sort of social media or digital. Because as much as we seek to use these creative tools and social networks for the kingdom purposes, it shouldn't come to a surprise to anyone that these platforms do have a very real potential to actually cause a lot of harm to users and audience and consumers. So it's just, we do need to think about it seriously. So to help keeping this perspective, it is good to bring yourself, and I say that like myself, back to why we're doing this.
Yeah.
What are the purposes and intentions behind our communications plan? Both for you or your church, your organization, how does this serve God and the kingdom?
Yeah.
Because as much as we can lose that perspective, taking comms too seriously, sometimes we can get down on ourselves and feel it's pointless and just not helpful to anyone. But I need to remember that it is valuable and I am doing meaningful work. I am serving the kingdom. Comms jobs, creative roles, and all of those sorts of, I don't want to say odd, but, not typically always appreciated in the church, sort of personalities and natures and giftings and interests. They are so often left behind in the church. They are ministries. They are missional opportunities. They are valued. They are a service. And if God made you that way, you don't need to try and fit into anything else just because your service isn't churchy enough.
Yeah, definitely. It won't always be the most prominent thing, and that's probably right, but that doesn't mean that it's not valid and it isn't service for God. And I think that's why it's really important to think about giftings as we're talking about prayer and as we're talking about comms as a ministry. To think about giftings in the same way that we would with any other ministry. We need to recognize that comms is an area that needs certain skills or sensitivities. We need to carefully think about whether comms is realistically the best role for a given person. Just because someone can do it doesn't necessarily mean they should or that they're the right person for it. It's definitely good to give people opportunities to serve, especially if comms is an area they're passionate about. But we should then use that as an opportunity to test the water, both for them and us. Not just do they enjoy it, but are they skilled? Are they gifted? Does their attitude reflect a sort of humble way of serving God through this? Yeah. And we do the same for anything else. If someone wants to join the music group, I think we'd probably want to listen to them play their instrument rather than just chucking them in and hoping that they're good, but actually if they're terrible, then everyone's going to end up embarrassed.
I mean, I've been there.
What?
I've had that.
Yeah, I've I've seen it too many times as well, but I think it usually happens for the wrong, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong. I mean, you don't want to hurt people, but at the same time, sometimes I think you know that there's potential for hurt, and we let it happen anyway because it's easier that way. So whilst comms isn't life or death, that doesn't mean that we should just hand over the reins of the social media accounts to anyone just because they show an interest. And even when it's really tempting to do that because it might get it off of our own to-do list, as with any gift, it needs to be recognized in someone and not just recognized by that person, the person in question. And sometimes the conversations that go with this can be uncomfortable, but speaking the truth and love to them will be good in the long term and could avoid potentially harmful situations further down the line and avoid hurt being caused. So a good thing to be thinking about, I mean, whether you're doing this as a comms leader or part of the church leadership, is how do we identify the people that can serve? And this could involve raising awareness of the different areas that need help and that need service as well. So mentioning and praying for comms from the front, there's an idea. Or highlighting the different types of people in the church, seeing what they do, getting to know your congregation better, as well as their skills or the things that they're interested in.
Yeah, I think getting people up the front is great, though very often people work behind the scenes because they don't want to come up to the front. But I think it is really important. We also want to encourage regular prayer from the church for your ministry. So I think it doesn't even have to be comms, it could be the gardening team. Put them at the front and pray for them. Yeah. But it is really important to ensure that you are equipping the church to pray for comms. So don't just sort of leave them blind of not really knowing what to say, including the comms of your church, those doing the comms, those receiving it, at all points of the journey of it, essentially.
Yeah, the testimonies.
Well, exactly. Otherwise people don't see the point in it.
Yeah.
You're making sure to keep your leadership in the loop. And I think the congregation as well, it helps them to kind of get it so that they know why you're always taking photos or trying to encourage people to like and share. I always get told off, you're always on your phone. Yeah, because I'm actually putting out posts what the church is up to at the moment. So it's sort of, I'm doing my job, not just being an annoying millennial on my phone. It might encourage them if they know why you're doing it. It might encourage them to do it too.
And it's not just that you're doing your job for the sake of a job because churches have to have social media accounts. You are doing God's work in doing that. Yeah.
I mean, also it's doing it appropriately. I'm not going to go and stand up the front whilst the minister's talking and, take a church selfie. But
I've seen that too.
Yeah, I haven't done that. I was just imagining doing it. Sorry. Threw me off.
Church communicator Hannah Fleming Hill recently lost her job due to taking a selfie next to the vicar.
I just go up and take
Congregants said during communion was not the most appropriate time.
Hey, yeah, that would be good. No, it wouldn't be, but it'd be quite funny though. We enjoy the kind of this time tomorrow style segments. And again, it doesn't need to be just reserved for the comms teams, but other people in the church, what are they doing that needs prayer? And I think it's a great tip for a regular or sort of occasional element to include within your services. Gets people to know who other people are and what they do, especially if they don't see someone always up the front or in worship or coffee or welcoming. Actually, do you know what? They're cleaning the church every week, but they're doing it when there's no one else in the church. But no one knows that because they're not being watched doing it. And I think actually it's potentially something you can use for social media content, with a little bit of rewriting, something to share, put on your website, put on newsletters of highlighting who you've spoken to this week. I think it's a fantastic way of community building with actually very little effort.
Yeah. I think just showing what people are doing has so much value, and it can stop that judgmental attitudes from taking hold as well.
Mm-hmm.
That just because you don't see exactly what that person's doing every week doesn't mean that they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned like the gardening team. I used to wonder, if I'm completely blunt, what was the purpose of the flower team? The people who had their special cupboard in the church and were always so busy, like after the Sunday service, and put their energy into flowers, which, as far as I'm concerned, the church service would continue exactly the same whether they were at the front or not. But by seeing what they're doing, by hearing about what they're doing, and the testimonies, like I say, of the effects of what they're doing, it makes you see the impact they're having. And so I'm not thinking of the flower team anymore and thinking what a waste of time, but I'm seeing there are people in hospital, there are people who have been ill and haven't been able to get out of church this week, who that has meant a great deal to them to get some flowers and some note, and to know that the church is thinking of them and praying for them. So whatever ministry it is, take turns, get them up the front, pray for them, and it will help other people to pray for them as well. I think it's just a good thing for the church.
Yeah, definitely.
And so if we go back to our very first episode where we explained the seemingly very random name for our podcast, we wanted to remind ourselves with gourds and pomegranates and draw ourselves back to the excellence and the skills that God's people in the past have used in service to the kingdom, specifically with building the temple with the gourds and pomegranates, but the ways that God's people have applied their creative gifts with as much artistic flair as they can, reflecting the creative nature that God has given us as he's created us, and not for their own glory, but to glorify God.
Yeah.
And so we seek to carry out all of the comms activities that we do with this same excellence. And we don't always get it right, but we do it with the humility that comes with prayer and making sure that we can just try and serve God with everything that we can. And from that point on, handing it over to him to do something with.
And it does require God to be present in our work for it to be effective. And sometimes we can forget it. We can get distracted by the numbers and the attention that we forget who it's for and why we're doing it. We can have all the viral strategies, the best cameras and amazing musicians to make, amazing content that will reach people, and it may do. But equally, God can use a humble video shot on your iPhone to reach people and dramatically change lives.
Yeah, he's used things that have more humble roots than that. Yeah. So we strongly believe that God can and does change lives through the work that you and I are doing for our churches, whether that's designing leaflets, editing videos, creating social content, or just updating the church website. And so we do want to keep praying for all of you that God continues to work through you. And we'd love to hear from you about the fruits of your efforts and your testimonies as well. So do let us know at hello@gppodcast.uk, and we'll be back soon.